starting a top of funnel strategy with actually nothing and having to establish that on your own dime is probably quite ballsy.
If we know what kind of air quality people are breathing in different buildings, at their homes and at schools, that data can be leveraged to build, different health insights, for example. Now we have 250 plus monitors across 15 cities and just pushing live data, pushing content, and slowly, you start to build awareness. And as that awareness grows, it then trickles down into our main business model, which is...
You're watching Next Big Wave, the podcast for founders by founders in Southeast Asia. In this episode, we're going to talk about founder journeys, growth strategies, and much more. Just to help me out, if you could like and subscribe, it would be awesome. And let's get into the episode. Hey, welcome to this episode of Next Big Wave. Today, I'm joined by founder Nathan Roestandy, who is the founder of NAFAS in Indonesia. NAFAS is an air quality startup that is super exciting. We've already had several conversations about it with Nathan, and I'm super excited to introduce him to this podcast. Nathan, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, super exciting to have you. We've already had a conversation last week, and I felt you would be a perfect founder for our podcast. We talked about your background, your current startup, and some of the stuff you've been working on. So in your own words, would you mind kind of walking us through your journey and how you ended up doing what you're doing right now and where you are actually as well?
Yeah, so I'm calling out of Jakarta, Indonesia. My background is I was born and raised here in Jakarta. My father's Indonesian, spent most of my life here, lived abroad. I was in Canada for close to 10 years before moving back to Southeast Asia, before moving back to Jakarta, which was around 2013. During those years, it was a very exciting period in tech in Southeast Asia. That was kind of the first wave of, a lot of the rocket companies. And we kind of had a front row seat on a lot of the kind of big unicorn companies you see today. My initial background was actually in manufacturing and product design. I spent about 8+ years in the manufacturing space across several different industries. And what always fascinated me was, basically building products, right? And during those years, I traveled very frequently to China. And I think one of the interesting trends that I noticed in China was this whole thing around air pollution and, really how almost overnight air pollution suddenly became a very important topic amongst the urban Chinese. And when you fast forward, 10 or so years, the Chinese government has made remarkable strides in improving air quality. And of course, that was largely due to the fact that there was a pretty intense pressure from the public. So that's kind of how things sort of originated in terms of the idea. Coming back to Jakarta one trip, I was surprised to find that nobody knew anything about air pollution in Jakarta. You have the capital city, Greater Jakarta, the size of, almost 20 million people. Indonesia alone is close to 300 million people. So it was surprising to see that there was very little access to air quality data. And so this kind of immediately presented an opportunity because obviously air pollution is a problem that's endemic to most emerging markets. It's a byproduct of industrialization, of a growing economy. And so it became very clear that air pollution was only going to get worse. And this is an opportunity for us to kind of move into a completely new category in the environmental space and build a business around that problem.
Yeah, sweet. And something that strikes me first is you mentioned there was no real measurements of air quality in Indonesia. Is this because, all of a sudden you as a private entity wanted to start measuring it and providing that data for people to enhance their lives around it, but is that the case in most countries? Is private sector tackling air quality issues and the measurement of it? Or I'm assuming in places like Europe and North America, this is government-led initiatives, right?
Correct. So it's typically government, and then there's private sector participation, communities, individuals, etc. When you look at, the EU, when you look at North America, and other developed countries, you see that the infrastructure for measuring air quality is a combination of both kind of private and public actors. And of course, when you look at emerging markets, the absence of government action then creates this kind of imperative for the private sector to move in and provide that service.
Okay. Because I kind of categorize it as almost the same level as uh, the weather sort of measurements, meaning, you know, up to until you guys joined Indonesia and started measuring air quality, I'm sure the government or some entity was measuring the weather in the country. So is that normally a joint effort, or it's completely separated and then they aggregate that data? Because when I open my Apple Weather or whatever app I'm using, usually those two pieces of information are aggregated. So in my opinion, it's something that is done in duality. Is that a wrong assumption?
Well, they're two very different instruments. So weather stations versus air quality monitors are two very different pieces of equipment. Air quality is much more specific because you are measuring very specific gases, you're measuring particle pollution. There is some overlap, right? Obviously, weather and climate is a big influencer on air pollution levels. So when you
Hmm.
measure temperature, relative humidity, these are, relevant not only to air pollution, but of course, these are weather metrics as well. And when you look at platforms like Apple, right, you have your weather app and they'll tell you what the kind of air pollution levels are. These are
Yep.
because Apple is able to aggregate data from existing kind of open source data that's available. Now, in Indonesia at the time, there was an absence of this kind of ground monitors on the ground that was basically producing real-time data. And so it's very difficult for you to aggregate when you don't have that kind of source of truth, so to speak.
Okay. And so your idea then was to, I mean, you built these measurement tools around Jakarta and then further Indonesia. What's the business model? What did you plan to build? What was the long term perspective?
Well, initially, so in China, I spent a lot of time running, and at the time, I also had very little knowledge around air pollution. And I remember after going for these long runs, feeling uncomfortable. I would get these kind of throat irritations. I would be breathing heavily, and of course, I later realized that this was due to the fact that I was breathing in air pollution that was 20 times above the WHO limit. And so coming to in Indonesia, it was a personal pain point because I wanted to know what the air quality was like around my neighborhood, around areas where I typically do outdoor activities. So it kind of started off as that. And, I think the initial blueprint we had for the business was, you had to first crack this problem that was a sizable problem, but nobody really knew anything about, right? So we wanted to kind of tackle the first order problem, which is how do we just shed light on this massive problem, right? And so we just started installing monitors. Now we have 250 plus monitors across 15 cities and just pushing live data, pushing content, and slowly, you start to build awareness. And as that awareness grows, it then trickles down into our main business model, which is helping buildings, homes provide healthy air quality as a service.
Okay. Cool. And were you able to get any backing from the government as you started providing this public service, essentially, of measuring air quality around the city and the country?
No, we were initially met with a lot of resistance. We initially tried to work with the local government, so the city of Jakarta, to install in public areas, right? So installing in bus stations, basically, because they had,
Hmm.
obviously tons of bus stations, and they, made an ideal location. However, we had issues getting the permits, and we were met with some resistance. I think especially during then, this was a problem that they didn't really want they didn't really want it to surface for obvious reasons. So
Right.
we had to find a workaround of, how do we publish data from outdoor locations, but not requiring kind of these public zones, right? So we kind of had to figure out a way to work with other private sectors, right? So people that parking lots of buildings, backyards of people's homes, these types of locations where we wouldn't encounter kind of the problem with getting permits and so forth.
And I mean, one thing is not allowing you to measure in their locations. The other thing is, as you mentioned, they weren't so keen on the results you were going to publish. Are you now met with objections around that information you're releasing to the public, or is that now kind of something they've accepted?
I think only in recent, I would say only in the past year has the government's view on this shifted slightly. In the beginning, there was a lot of resistance, and there was a lot of pushback because basically a private company is publishing environmental data, and that was met with all sorts of regulatory problems. But as we kind of grew in popularity, obviously the public was very much in favor of what we were doing, basically disseminating information, democratizing information around air quality, which of course greatly affects people's health, right? So because we had this very strong kind of community support, um, now the government is approaching us more as a partner. So there's more of a collaborative atmosphere versus, a few years back.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's cool. And I know from our conversation that you leverage that information, that data, and provided access to it to everyone as sort of a top of funnel for your business where you're actually making money on providing the solutions to air quality, whether it's at home or in corporation. So can you elaborate on that strategy? Because I think it's I mean, first of all, congrats on accessing that data because starting a top of funnel strategy with actually nothing and having to establish that on your own dime is probably quite ballsy, but how did that work out for you? Is it a strategy that is essentially still ongoing? Is still your go-to or what's going on there? If you're watching this and you're a B2B startup founder in Southeast Asia, struggling to grow your startup, we have a whole community of founders just like you. And on a weekly basis, we discuss strategies and growth hacks. We'd love to have you amongst us. Feel free to join at nextbigwave.co or find the link in the description. I'll see you there.
Very much so. So I think, when we started to install outdoor monitors and publishing data on our app, we started to get a lot of followers. And how we essentially finance that whole operation was basically working with corporations, businesses through their ESG and sustainability initiatives. So we would offer an investment opportunity, an ESG investment opportunity, which we called the Plant a Sensor program. So basically, they would contribute towards planting a sensor in neighborhoods and communities where access to data was previously unavailable. And in turn, we provided a platform for these companies to promote their sustainability initiatives. And that's kind of how we scaled the outdoor map or the outdoor network. And as we were doing that, we started to look into indoors. This is still during COVID, and so obviously, what COVID really brought to light was the fact that diseases spread through the air, right? That COVID was an airborne disease. Most of outbreaks are happening not only, of course, airborne, but also indoors where you had poor air quality. So we started looking into measuring air quality inside buildings, inside homes. This is something nobody was doing. Nobody had any idea what kind of air quality they were breathing in inside these different indoor environments. And when we started to collect lots of data around schools, offices, we were in clinics, homes, we noticed that indoor air pollution levels were largely the same as outdoor. And this was surprising because you have this kind of instinctive thought that we're protected when we're indoors, right? It's like you're in a building that's airproof or outdoor air cannot get inside. when in fact you were breathing in air pollution levels that were basically the same as they were outside. So this kind of made us really look into the built environment, right? So how do we create these healthy indoor spaces? And COVID, I think, ushered in this, concept of sick building syndrome and the fact that, poor air quality contributes to sickness, contributes to the spread of diseases, et cetera. So, we sought to, how do we build a service or a solution that was service based? We could help different types of buildings, be it a school, be it a home, an office, provide healthy air quality.
Okay. And to be honest, I don't recall how early I started seeing air purifiers in homes. I know I've had the Dyson for quite a while, and I know in Thailand most households have their own air purifiers. Are you like you're providing an alternative, right? You're providing an on like a service based product rather than selling the hardware necessarily. Can you walk me through the differences? And personal interest, is my air purifier not providing me good quality air? Because it says the AQI is 0.02 or something like that. But is that false information?
No, no, it's not false information. The only issue is that there isn't a standard, and a lot of these companies are not using international standards. They kind of come up with their own index, if you will. So that can be a bit misleading. Now, in emerging markets, I think especially when we started, penetration of purifiers into urban households was still quite low, mainly because people didn't know they had an air pollution problem
Hmm.
indoors, right? But of course, now you start to see a lot more brands and a lot more types of purifiers. But one of the pain points we saw was the fact that a lot of these hardware devices were quite old school in the sense that they wouldn't be giving you kind of feedback on the actual performance, right? So it'd be just kind of this fan that was running, and you didn't really know what it was doing. Was it really improving the air quality? And that led to kind of this poor user experience where people would just stop using them. They would stop replacing the filters. And overall, the performance and user experience was quite low. So when we entered into this indoor business, we initially focused on residential, and we wanted to build a system that was basically a smart system that could collect data in real time using an indoor air quality monitor, and the system would then use that data to optimize the performance of the different purifiers that it was connected to. And so that resulted in this, one, much better performance, but two, we created a much more engaging user experience where we would communicate data similar to kind of how wearable tech companies, the Fitbits and whatnot, how they would leverage data to kind of build the user experience and drive engagement. So that's kind of how what the playbook was for residential. And we started to look deeper into other types of buildings. And this is when we noticed that, wow, actually, providing healthy air quality inside larger buildings was a lot more complicated. You couldn't just install a bunch of portable units and have healthy air quality. It was a much more complex process. And of course, this was an industry that saw very little innovation. And when you take into account all the advances in IoT, in big data, in sensor technologies, that this presented an opportunity for us to provide a system for buildings, right? And we were kind of looking at different models, and we ended up piloting this subscription model. It's like, hey, what if companies didn't have to pay anything upfront, didn't have to purchase anything and deal with all the operational complexities? They would simply pay a monthly fee, and we would provide the end-to-end service of the hardware, the software. We collect the data for them. That data can be used for sustainability reporting, green building certifications, and we also started to help these companies advertise air quality as part of their kind of marketing strategy. So now what we have today is a solution called Clean Air Zone, which is an end-to-end air quality system for any building type.
And so, do you integrate within their existing HVAC systems, or how do you tackle a big building like that? Because I always wondered, everyone has an HVAC in Southeast Asia. Why are these air purifiers not built in? So I don't know if that's something you're already doing, or if that's in the pipeline.
No, that's a really good question. So, that's kind of what we asked too. It's like, well, all these buildings have HVACs, and why isn't there, why don't they have filters built in? Well, it turns out that because there isn't regulation requiring buildings to have a certain level of filtration built into their HVAC, that it was just simply not there. And when you want to add a very dense type of filter, for example, a HEPA filter, which is very dense,
Hmm.
and you install that into the existing HVAC, the HVAC can't really support it because it wasn't built to withstand that additional capacity, right? In
Right.
very simple terms, when you install a very dense filter, suddenly airflow is impeded because it has to go through this super dense filter, and that creates a pressure drop, which then messes the HVAC system completely. So then you have to look into, okay, we have to either upgrade the HVAC and spend, millions of dollars if you're a high-rise building, and so we provide an alternative to that. What we do is we come in and we can provide solutions that integrate directly to existing HVACs. We can retrofit existing HVACs, and we also have a range of standalone kind of plug and play solutions as well. So because every building is so unique and so different, that we had to come in with a very multi-pronged approach towards how do we provide a solution that's specific to certain building types.
Yeah, and I guess that's tricky because as an early stage startup, you want to focus on one ICP and do it really, really well. Seems like you're tackling a few problems. Are you still trying to figure out what is the ideal ICP to go after and to build specifically for that, or you're planning to build really for everything and sort of diversify your investments?
So we realized then that we could play a role of an integrator versus having to build everything ourselves, right? So really, our focus now is building the cloud, building the software ecosystem, and providing kind of integrations for different existing hardware solutions that are in the market. So initially, we designed and manufactured a lot of our products. That was very time consuming, very capex intensive, and so forth. And because supply chain and manufacturing is our forte, we had contacts and access to a lot of OEM providers that had really, really good hardware solutions, but they had no software ecosystem. So we approached them and said, hey, if can you embed this chip into your device? Now that device can connect to our cloud and we can have full control over it, and then we can run, fleet management, automation algorithms, and different things. So our focus now is more on the software side, and that's where we see the value because air quality is a very important health indicator, right? So if we know what kind of air quality people are breathing in different buildings, at their homes, and at schools, that data can be leveraged to build, different health insights, for example, right? So I think the data component is now kind of our primary focus, and it is using that kind of approach where we're able to scale the business and the solution without having to, go through the pain points of having to build your own hardware.
Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And something that just comes to mind is because I'm always thinking of growth hacks, and you obviously figured out one of the growth hacks being providing the data to everyone, democratizing that. Second one, you mentioned a certification. So did you create your own certification so that you could sort of certify certain buildings that are using your product, and therefore they would be well, they would have better access to certain tenants or whatnot? Is that one of the strategies you use as well? The
Yes,
certification
so
is yours, or you're leveraging another one?
so we have our certification, but we also work with other larger third-party certifications, right? So you have kind of international certifications that are well established, And so what we
Mhm.
do is we provide the data, we provide the solution, and businesses can then utilize that data to apply for different building certifications, which we also integrate through our platform as well. So we realize that you have this very fragmented ecosystem, and the whole process is very cumbersome. Everything is very offline. The hardware is offline. All these different processes, if you not integrate into ESG, all these things are very, very much fragmented. So what we do is we basically coordinate everything. We digitize everything into a single platform.
Okay. And have you explored? I mean, I'm sure you have, but like one of the things that I would have done would be leverage the data you have based on the zones and the AQI you're getting, or I don't know if you refer to it as AQI, and then provide a report to all the tenants or like all the business all the buildings in the area, and as a next step provide them a free audit, and from then on like use the fear factor of terrible air quality in their building to definitely get into your product. Is that something you've explored, or am I completely off?
No, no, no. You're completely on point. That's exactly what we did. So we learned that, once, for example, we installed in a school, and we would make the data very transparent. We would have QR codes that students could scan, and they would basically, it would upload, an air quality report. They could send those to parents. They could, schools could use them as part of like the newsletters, marketing, social media, etc.
Mm.
So this created this kind of a new experience around, oh wow, I can actually know what the air quality is like in these different locations in real time, and we use that to our advantage, right? And I think you know that speaks to the power of data. And another thing that we've been doing as well now is starting to engage health insurance companies, especially
Mm.
corporate health insurance companies, right? Because we realized that health insurance companies were becoming more creative at acquiring different data points, right? So they started acquiring data points from people's wearable devices, right? So if I know, or if they know that you exercise more and you have good biometrics, then that could result in a better premium. Conversely, uh, uh, because the air quality is plays such a big role in our overall health, that in itself then becomes a very important data point for them. So what we're trying to do now is we've been doing studies with telehealth companies, now with health insurance companies, to essentially build a use case around healthy air quality or poor air quality and adverse health outcomes, right? And once that becomes firmly established, of course there are countless of studies available, but once we can replicate that in kind of our own business, then that becomes a very powerful kind of use case to monetize data.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And so I see here you've been operating this for almost 4 years. Is that correct?
Correct.
Um, I'm assuming the first few years when you were setting up all these monitors must have been costly. Can you walk me through, how far along you are, how much you've raised, and like your traction to date?
Yeah. So we started just as, COVID unfolded. Of course, trying to build hardware during COVID, building a supply chain during COVID
Mm.
was very, very challenging. We initially we're going to build everything in China. We were literally in China end of January before flying back, and obviously since then everything just kind of the world just kind of shut down. So we had to figure out a way to build supply chain, build hardware locally in Indonesia, and so that took us, I think, a lot more time than we had initially planned. But it turned out to be somewhat of a blessing in disguise because there are long-term benefits towards establishing a manufacturing base here, especially as we start to grow in foreign markets. We recently entered Qatar market and the UAE market. And so having a manufacturing base in Indonesia, you can leverage certain regulation that are trying to essentially promote made in Indonesia products, right? And so there were some unforeseen benefits to that. Um, And so we didn't really launch anything until late 2021. And we were lucky that in the beginning we had a lot of support from angel investors that just were concerned about the problem and realized that nobody was tackling this problem. So me and my co-founders, we raised our initial kind of fundraise was $1 million in angel funding, and then now we're extending that to 1.5. So we're raising an additional 500,000. Still kind of angel rounds using safe notes. But we're also now started to fundraise our first equity round. So we are raising a seed round, and we're looking to close that hopefully by end of year.
Okay, good stuff. And how big is the seed round you're trying to raise?
We're trying to raise 2.5 million.
Okay. So the 500,000 is a bridge until you complete the seed round, right?
Correct. Yeah, yeah. I think there were some, some headwinds in the last outside of COVID, we had this major supply chain disruption. A lot of semiconductor parts, were in short supply, and that affected our supply chain as well. It affected everyone's supply chain, and then of course, the last year or so has also been a pretty rough time for startups in the region. And so, we've been, operating in a very frugal manner. We are aiming for profitability by Q4 this year.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we're excited to be raising this round and kind of moving towards the next phase of our business.
For sure. And then in terms of traction, can you share some numbers in terms of ARR or number of customers and sort of what your pipeline looks like, how you're planning to tackle like the next phase of your growth as well?
Yeah. So top line, we're now doing close to 850K in annual recurring revenue. So in ARR, and we basically have that 850K is divided on two parts. So you have basically, projects that we have installed, and basically project has been installed. We have the billing running, and then we have basically contracts that have been signed, but are pending execution or pending delivery. So our total revenue pipeline to date is approaching 5.5 million. This was all accomplished with zero marketing spend. Basically, again, using that kind of top funnel approach, people started to recognize NAFAS as, the air quality company that gave us a lot of thought leadership. It gave us a lot of credibility, and so that kind of trickled down into a lot of leads and business development for us. We serve roughly three core segments. We have residential and SMEs. We have corporate, so these are tenants in office buildings, and we have commercial, which is the latest segment. Now, commercial is everything from hotels, larger schools, universities, shopping malls, entire kind of high-rise buildings. So those are our three core segments. We have now around 140 customers in total. So that 850K ARR is based on roughly 130 something customers, right? Of course, our bread and butter, the main segment we focus on is our corporate and commercial, given that these are contracts that we're able to kind of build secure multi-year contracts. So we typically do up to 5-year contracts, and so with a 5-year contract, that gives us this kind of nice cash flow path, and we're able to then use that for to leverage financing, which we've done recently to alleviate some of the working capital problems we had. So recently, in the last end of May, we completed a round of debt. So basically, an inventory back loan against contracts that we had already signed that we just needed to execute. And I think going forward, that's kind of the model that we're trying to do is, I think for anything that is inventory related, we don't want to be funding that using equity.
For sure. I mean, that makes perfect sense. And just because you mentioned it earlier, you said you were kind of expanding to the Middle East there. Was there a reason why you wanted to go or leave Indonesia so fast? Because I know a lot of startups, they get tempted by the world because there's opportunities everywhere, right? And sometimes it's more beneficial for them to become the leader in their own turf. Can you walk me through that thought process on your end?
Yeah, so we it was quite lucky, and we we didn't plan it, but we work with a few technical advisors, so like scientists, global scientists, medical doctors, and one of our technical advisors referred us to a colleague of his that was running the HSC, the Health and Safety Department of a large oil and gas company in Doha. And so, we got in touch with them and they said, hey, we have this massive air pollution problem. We've been getting a lot of sandstorms, and we suspect that a lot of that fine dust was, entering the building through the ventilation systems. And so we were looking for a company that could help kind of do an audit and just, see what's going on. So, that eventually led to a contract, and it then kind of, we were then introduced to the markets in Qatar, and then in UAE, and of course now Saudi. And we were, I think initially just very impressed with the amount of, sustainability investment into sustainability, which was largely a top-down government-led initiative, something which
Mm,
we don't see in Southeast Asia, or more specifically in Indonesia. And so, that then presented a very unique opportunity because you had this kind of massive top-down push, and they're already designing policies for example, indoor air quality, right? Because they know that indoor air pollution is contributing to a lot of respiratory diseases. And so they're looking at it as a preventative measure. And so because we have these very strong tailwinds in these markets, and of course, corporates there also have very deep pockets.
hmm
I think it's probably one of the only booming regions in the world, especially since COVID, and with all the geopolitical instability. So I think it's just a mixture of different factors, but we didn't initially plan it. It just kind of presented itself, and we say, "Oh wow, this is a great opportunity." And of course, NAFAS. It turns out that the name NAFAS is actually Arabic. It's an Indonesian word, but it's rooted in Arabic, and it also means the same thing, which is breathe. And so we
Oh,
thought
wow.
that, okay, let's give it a shot.
I didn't ask you about the name actually. That's a good one. Do you have the .com for that?
No, we don't have the .com. We're working on it though. We're working on it.
That would be a really good one. Five letter words.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks for all these sort of insights into your business. It's fascinating. And I mean, to me, air pollution is probably the number one concern I have in Thailand. The rest is really
Yeah.
awesome. And I think a lot of people agree in Southeast Asia in general, like air pollution is such a big problem. You're already fixing the indoors. Maybe in the long run, you'll start looking at fixing it outdoors. I don't know if that's a problem that can be tackled at all, but definitely something interesting and very big. Before we sort of phase out, is there anything you want to shout out, either personal or for your business?
No, I think, well, of course, we've had incredible supporters along the way. We have a great team. A lot of our team members have been with us for a very long time. And so, we have a team of just very passionate individuals, which I'm very, very grateful for. And also, we've had very supportive angel investors that just had a genuine concern for the problem, and so have just been very great supporters. We work with some amazing technical advisors that advise us on all the science aspects of the business, since we're not scientists ourselves. And this whole thing around atmospheric chemistry is very, very complex. So I think, my kind of shout out is just, um, I think the more the more you grow as an organization, you realize that, there are just there's so many factors, outside of your own that, contribute to your success. So yeah, really, really good to kind of mention that.
Appreciate it. That's a good one. Well, Nathan, it was great to have you on the show. I look forward to chatting again and to stay in tune with NAFAS and how you guys are doing. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Pleasure.
All right, that's the pod. All right, I'm going to stop it.
Nice.